restartpod. Big thing today. We kind of talked about it yesterday, but SpaceX has IPO'd. Obviously, really, really exciting. I think before talking about anything else, I think it's just cool to talk about moment of triumph. Like it is like a 20-year journey in like very, very hard tech, and regardless of how you feel about like the IPO numbers or the financials or whatever you want to dig into, um, it is like a monumental effort to make a not software company go this far. Um, any company for that matter. And obviously like a lot of trial and error and publicity and embarrassment and hostility along the way there. But just really impressive, always inspiring, like really, really awesome to talk about and eventually see a company of this scale and this ambition materialize this way.
Yeah, I think that's well said. My additive thoughts are reportedly there will be thousands, excess of 4,000, 3,000, 5,000, whatever it kind of ends up being, but thousands in any event of millionaires as a result of this singular IPO. And like, I think we can have thoughtful discussions around how we can better depolarize some of the wealth in this country or globally, but independent of any of those conversations for the moment, being able to effectively create thousands of millionaires, based on Elon at the front of it, but certainly a team's vision, lots of private capital backing this thing, almost going under more than one time, and now kind of seeing the largest IPO in history. It's the reason why, frankly, not to make this about like my vantage point specifically, but it's the reason why I enjoy venture so
Mm-hmm.
much is like the losses are the losses, and that like sometimes things don't work, sometimes companies don't work, the market moves in ways that we can't predict. But when it goes right, it goes so asymmetrically right that people, even tangentially related lives, are changed forever. And there's just something about that that's really inspiring, especially to your point when it's not software. Like for whatever reason,
Right.
like hardware is just it's visually more tantalizing, I think. So like this is
Right.
like maybe the most visually impressive company of all
Right.
time, just given that like it's actually launching and catching rockets. So cool all the way around. Like from someone who enjoys technology, really enjoys great entrepreneurs doing great things, who likes, you know, engineering feats of excellence, right? This thing is
Yeah.
kind of all of that wrapped into one thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think the tweet I saw was cool is that back in the day, SpaceX, like, to pay their even just like not technical workers, like folks who were like janitorial or like kind of like support staff, they were paid in equity. So there are
Mhm.
folks who like they're not like some like the typical you'd imagine like, oh, like Silicon Valley elite being passed around company to company. It's just like they rewarded for being a part of something really, really early that was like really high ambition.
Yeah.
And there's people who like the tweet I saw is that like there's some people who like they just kind of signed up for like a like cafeteria type of job because
Mhm.
they needed a job. And um I think if you look at it in the whole line of like now they're millionaires who are minted, there are some people whose like lives are permanently changed forever had they not taken that one job in like 2004, you
Yep.
know.
Yeah.
um
I saw a
which I thought was
story
funny.
of a welder with welding
Yeah.
parts on some of the early rocket ships that is now a millionaire because, yeah, he's been with the company for, you know, 15, 20 years.
Yeah, it's amazing. I do think the we can get into like the modern day because the IPO has happened, like the prices have come up. As of time of talking, let's look at what the stock is at the literal moment. Up 24% from like IPO number. Looks like it's kind of stabilizing. So it's at like 168, peaked. What's that? Peaked at 176.
Yeah, give or
I
take.
think the
Mhm.
way yeah, like the way we've talked about, which I kind of agree. I mean, we'll see how much this kind of like the floating effect you described ends up impacting things, but most IPOs go through this arc of inflated retail bumping and then followed by a FOMO acceleration, followed by a sell effectively. Um, so I think again, regardless how you feel about the company, like I'm of the opinion that this is like a generational effort. Like regardless how you feel about it, like they are like doing something that is going to be future valued very, very highly. Um, I just anticipate that there will be a correction, but that's like normal. It's not a thing to be like hitting anyone in the financial criticisms with. That's just going to be the arc of things.
Yeah, I think I have two thoughts on this, and I've this is like thematically in line with a lot of the discussions that we've been having over the last couple of weeks, even kind of couple of months. I do fully expect there to be some kind of price recoil. That said, I think I shared a PDF with the group yesterday, following our discussion, where there going to be a number of ETFs that are buying into this company early because of
Yeah.
the absolute magnitude of this company, and so I am very interested to see if that does kind of buoy that price recoil. I still expect it to kind of come down off of its kind of quote unquote current peak, but I think there's an interesting unknown to me in that this is the first time anyone full stop is living through this unique experience where company basically debuts in the top six or seven, depending on where
Hmm.
this like levels out, largest companies in the world. So you get immediate index adoption, you get immediate passive investors via 401k and other retirement accounts, and we'll just see where the price stabilizes. Again, I do fully expect it to kind of come back down a little bit.
Right.
I don't know if I have a definitive projection or opinion on if it will come down back below its IPO price. That
Hmm.
feels unlikely to me, but I certainly think like right now, looking at it, it's valued at roughly 2.2, 2.3 trillion, something like that.
Hmm.
Where it kind of debuted around, call it 1.5 to 7, depending on kind of at what point people were getting their allocation. Um, yeah, crazy.
Yeah, I just anticipate, I mean, with how much of the stock is like reserved for retail, like unusually so for an IPO, like a lot of it's for retail. I just anticipate we'll see a lot more volatility in like the upcoming week. Again, expected. I don't think it's a mark against the company. You think it. I expect the correction to come like to start happening like Wednesday or Thursday next week, kind of thing. Um, and like again, it's expected, I guess. I'm curious again. I mean, we can kind of talk about like where the fervor is right now and how people are discussing it in like markets. Um, I mean, I think the criticism before the IPO was obviously people talking about like this valuation is kind of batshit, like it's really, really hard to justify from where it is. And obviously with the run up that's happening right now, that valuation is just going up. Um, I think the discussion you were including about the whole like accelerated time into ETF, I think is going to be really interesting. I don't really have a firm opinion on that now as someone who's like most of my financial like market exposure is through ETFs. I do think that's like worth elaborating just again for folks listening. We have folks like live just listening right now,
Yeah.
which is a very,
Yeah.
very interesting nuance I don't think most would be aware of.
Yeah. So again, public indexes like the S&P 500, the Dow Jones, NASDAQ has their own indexes. Those things track depending on which one you're talking about, track the largest companies in the world on various exchanges, either by market cap or total trading price and kind of other factors. And essentially, what has happened with this IPO specifically, unlike other IPOs, because of its overall magnitude, right? When it comes out at $1 trillion or $2 trillion, it becomes instantaneously one of the top 10 largest companies by market cap in the world. That doesn't think about its profitability. It doesn't think about its price to earnings ratio, none of that. Just anchoring on market cap. Well, there are certain rules that typically dictate that a stock be on a public market for X amount of days or have profitability based on typical GAAP accounting, those kind of things. Some of those things, not all of them, but some of those were waived. And as a result, what you end up with is the largest retirement managers. Think about them like Vanguard, Fidelity. Most folks have heard of like Invesco's QQQ. There's Blackrock. There's a couple of others and like depending on what their internal thresholds are and which kind of market indices these various retirement managers track, their entry point and their kind of like lockup or long hold short, et cetera. Forced buying versus elective buying, all that kind of stuff. I guess you would call it forced versus discretionary, like elective buying differ, so that they're not all the same. So Vanguard doesn't have the same rules as Fidelity, doesn't have the same rules as Invesco, QQQ, et cetera. But in aggregate, the result of all of this is that you have early passive accounts, meaning I'm invested in a 401k or I'm invested in a 403b or whatever my retirement account is through my employer, right? Which currently is Duke University. they use Fidelity as an example,
Mhm.
right? So I have funds in Fidelity. Some of that is invested in like mixed market, passively managed ETFs, right? And as a result of that, at some point in the reasonably near future, I haven't checked I don't know if it's going to be 5 days from now or 15 days from now or 50 days from now, but I will be a holder of SpaceX, even by taking no action, simply because my indexes that are my ETFs that track the indexes that are passively managed will end up in those positions. And that is a fundamentally unique phenomenon that we haven't experienced before, which is what is so enticing to me around whether or not we will see, the typical curve, as you kind of illustrated, luxury for an IPO is initial enthusiasm kind of recoils back down to a price that is nearing the IPO. And then for good companies, it trades kind of flat around the IPO price for a while. And then it kind of then takes its jump, like assuming some
Right.
breakout success on the next innovation. Like that's usually how it goes. So initial bump, recoil, flattening, and then jump again for successful companies. This one, in what would have been the midst of that recoil, is going to be buoyed by these
Yeah.
passive buying events. And so the question in my mind is how much recoil do you actually get versus how much is kind of backstopped by all
Like
this passive
dampened
buying? Exactly,
almost.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I do think I mean, like, I don't, I think that it's interesting. Like this whole mechanism is obviously fairly new. I don't know which sort of companies we should be watching for as like this is a phenomenon that will happen to them generally. Like obviously SpaceX and its valuation is like again generational. Like there's just not many companies of this variety that hit IPO. Um, I do think I'm speaking for myself, like very happy with my exposure to SpaceX just being ETF driven. Like it's obviously like a very large and volatile and publicly like exposed stock, or rather like very subject to a lot of divisive opinions. Um, I do want to talk about like what I was just browsing Call Sheet while you're kind of like looking at it. Mostly not to like place bets, but just to see what people are like debating about. One thing that was interesting, like the first thing I saw that stuck out to me in like the IPOs category was the question of like what sector will SpaceX be assigned to? Um, and like I think that's pretty curious in regards to, like how you're like evaluating this thing. I don't think that this has resolved yet. um I don't know if that's like already answered or set in market, but the people were like debating between, is this a communication service, is this IT, is this industrials, given like what happened with Starlink being their like main profit maker. But then you mix in the XAI purchase, you mix in the fact that they're like a manufacturing like giant, um it's interesting to not have clarity on like sector assignment. Like it feels very very up in the air for what is Elon Inc.'s traditional vertical integration, especially when you think about like what happens with Tesla eventually down the road, all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, I don't have a lot to say here other than just laying it out for anyone that's unfamiliar with this. Inside of an ETF, for every company, they are assigned a sector based on, honestly, I think it's just their dominant form of revenue, which in this case kind of does steer SpaceX towards like communication services of all of them. So I don't know if they like how often they revisit sector assignments to update, meaning like all of a sudden if cloud computing spend or something like that eclipses the spend on Starlink, do they all of a sudden become information technology infrastructure? I'm not
Right.
exactly sure either, but it is curious to me as well. I also think it's worth noting on this very topic, not just call sheet, but Hyperliquid. Hyperliquid called the kind of opening IPO trading price within $1 of the range. So I am kind of
Really?
constantly pretty impressed by how well these alternative markets, right? Prediction markets. Hyperliquid is kind of a prediction market. It's kind of like a perpetuals, alternative asset market. They're
Right.
highly highly accurate with any even kind of like notional amount of volume. So it doesn't take that much volume. There's been several white papers published on this. It doesn't take that much volume. Like you don't need millions of dollars in volume to do accurate price discovery. Like your critical
Right.
mass is more like 10 grand to get to like
Right.
real price discovery. You just need like several market participants because you can't have one or two people just kind of debating. Right? You need a critical mass of number, but you don't need like sheer dollar volume. So these other kind of again alternative uh, platforms, let's call them trading platforms, are highly informational to these actual stock prices.
Out of curiosity, I mean, like the structure of that bet, was it like the kind of like over under? like pricing sort of thing? Like,
range. So
okay,
like, will
got it.
SpaceX IPO go out between $175 and $180, or
I see.
$180 and $185, that kind of thing. And
I
depending
see.
on the platform that people are using, you can get super granular. Like sometimes you can go between dollars. Sometimes it's between $10. Sometimes it's between $15 or $20, $100, whatever. Usually the longer time horizon, the wider that range gets.
Mhm.
But like for example, 15-minute crypto prices on those markets can be down to like 10 cents in the range. Can be, so it can
I
be very,
see.
very, very, very accurate.
Fascinating. Yeah, I mean, also I'm like with the market adjusting and refining and whatever. I think Elon opened to be like with the opening price is officially the first trillionaire, like 1.1 trillion,
Yep.
and obviously the price has shot up. With the booing effect, or booing is just a weird, like the ing effect is a weird word to come out of my mouth. Like dampening feels better, so I'll call it that. With the dampening effect you're describing on like what happens on correction, I'm curious to see like does that 1.1 stay firm? Like to me, like if you look at like who are like the tech oligarchs, like it tracks that Elon would be the first one, and like for the foreseeable future stays that way unless something really really grand happens with one of the AI companies or something. Um, but with the correction, I'm curious to see if that stays true. Obviously, with a lot of public sentiment against the whole like trillionaire, like wealth distribution conversation, all this kind of stuff mixing in with what is Elon Industries effectively.
hmm Yeah, there's two things. One, there's been speculated merger of SpaceX and Tesla, so I think if you see that, you'll see an additional valuation bump just because the combined power of those companies is probably it demands an increased multiple compared to the kind of the separation of those powers, if you will. The other thing I will say is I think the thing that people get wrong with respect to truly founder-led companies, SpaceX, Meta, Amazon before Bezos stepped down, Apple before Jobs unfortunately passed, OpenAI, Anthropic in the private markets still, Stripe, Databricks, all these companies. Um, they try to apply spreadsheet math to these
Hmm.
things, and there just is no way to mathematically model the bump that truly great founders get.
Right,
Right? There just is no like mathematical formula that can arrive at the Elon premium, for example, or
right.
the Zuckerberg premium, or the Bezos
The
premium,
reality
or the
distortion field
exactly,
traditionally.
exactly. And
Yeah.
so I think all of the analysts that look at this and say that valuation is batshit, to use your word, and that's like a accurate description. Like they're right.
Yeah.
The problem is that it that's not the only thing that matters. And there is
Yeah,
this like
you can't model for the founder as a force of entropy
right,
in their company
right,
effectively.
right,
Yeah.
right. And they just when they I think the rake that people keep stepping on, and they've been stepping on this rake for well over a decade now with Tesla, is when they're right to a small degree, meaning the assumptions come in and like, yes, the value collapses back down by whatever, right? We go from 2 trillion to 1 trillion. But when they're
Right.
wrong, it tends to be orders of magnitude, right?
Right.
It's just wrong to such a degree. So even leaving out the optimal game theory strategy of like which bet would you rather place because losses are 1x while wins are 10x.
The
I just
EV of your
yeah,
decision matrix is
yeah,
favoring
just
being
yeah, and
batshit effectively.
exactly. It's why it's just
Yeah.
like not only is optimism just simply more fun because you're just rooting for the things to work versus rooting for things to fail. It just mathematically, it just the payoff is so much better. I just again, I'm not arguing people should YOLO into, you know, this stock or GameStop or whatever. That's not really what the argument that I'm making. The argument that I'm making is I find all of the dialogue around usually traditional finance folks that are like, I spent 10 years in investment banking and my discounted cash flow said,
Right.
SpaceX is worth 800 billion. I'm not paying a dollar over 900 billion. It's like, fine, but you would have doubled your money had you just said Elon usually wins. Like it's
Right.
like the midwit meme that we talk about a
Yeah.
lot, where it's like,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
don't bet against Elon. My discounted cash flow says it's overvalued. Don't bet
Hmm.
against Elon. Right. And it's like, this is kind
Right.
of like we're like living through this in real time. So, um,
Right.
yeah.
Damn. No, that's inspiring. I mean, I actually find it like that. That just like with the wider point you just made about just like EV of risk or like optimism is generally rewarding to be a little loony. Like it should be inspiring, you know, like it should. I mean, I think like the SpaceX event in general, like to me, the big takeaway, like just like sitting here is that like in 2004, like someone saying I want to like put humanity on Mars would have been like insane. And obviously we're not there yet. Like it's a vision played over like decades, if not like centuries from where we are. But it still takes being a little bit weird and like a little bit delusional for that to even have a chance of happening. And as you said, if you get it right, you get it right by like a lot. If you get it wrong, you lose and you learn and you try something else, you know?
Yeah,
Um,
I think it's Jensen that typically gets credit for the quote that I've thrown around in the chat a couple times. Like it's I don't think he's ever said it directly, but paraphrasing, it's like pessimism is for losers, and it's
right,
not that that's true. Like pessimists are correct a lot. It's just that what ends up happening if you default to pessimism is that you don't try the things that would have worked, and so what you end up doing is you end up stacking these very small wins despite the opportunity cost of these very large wins. You know
right,
what I'm saying? Like every smart person in the world in 2004 would have said, "That's a bad idea. That won't work. You can't even buy rockets in the U.S. All these things have failed. NASA can't even like. There's all these reasons why it won't work, and they all sound very smart in the moment. And again, it's just kind of a repeat history of the world. But the fact of the matter is, when these things do work, and we can parse our opinions of Elon, and there's certainly great things about him, and certainly things that I wish he wouldn't fight people on
unsavory
X. But
things.
exactly,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah,
But in any event, I mean, just days like today when these things do work, it really is inspiring. I think in the most literal sense.
yeah, yeah. I think that's a good place to wrap. At least for we'll see what ends up happening over the course of the week. Again, I think peak of excitement is right now and all the hype is right now. And so we'll see how the market kind of reacts over sort of time, especially, I mean, with OpenAI and Anthropic, the IPOing documents kind of like spinning their internal cycles. We'll see how much like actual capital absorption kind of happens that SpaceX kind of grabs up that might go to them. But we'll save that conversation for as those details kind of come out. But until then, thanks y'all for joining. We'll catch y'all next week. Happy SpaceX IPO day. Peace.